You take a look at the fact that across the board, didn't matter what race they are, males turned towards Donald Trump, turned away from the Democratic Party. And why? That's the real question that should be asked. Why? Because in so many ways, the party basically dismissed him, left him out of the conversation, and not until the very end decided, oh, I better reach out and see if these guys are worth talking to. Yeah. And if you just look at the fact that we have, nobody, I think, in this country right now, the majority of people, believe in an equal playing field where everybody gets to participate and play. But when you start shoving certain things down people's throats that they don't want to have to eat, you're going to have to deal with the consequences of forcing somebody to do something that they didn't want to do.
I do think that there needed to be stronger outreach to men and men of all backgrounds. But in addition to that, there needed to be more men at the helm of the decision-making process on the campaign. A campaign that is run by a lot of women is probably not going to be the same campaign that can speak to men. I'm glad that we have this circle here because
Trump
it matters.
and Harris's campaign were run by a mixture of men and women. I'm not sure. I think it's just about a theory of the case.
But no,
right?
a lot of the messaging strategies that were developed to men by white women. And I think that that is a problem.
Interesting. I'll let you jump in a second, but I think you might find this interesting. You know, Scott Galloway, who has a podcast, many podcasts, but he's working on a book about.
Oh, thank God we have Scott Galloway's take on this, man.
What's going on with men in the
I was really wondering what he had to say about men.
Country. He writes this: young American men are in a crisis of underemployment, under-socialization. Soaring college costs affect people regardless of their gender, but manufacturing jobs, once a ticket to the middle class for men without college degrees, have been offshored.
Okay, never mind. He's actually not wrong. Okay, I'll give this to him. Scott Galloway once famously said the reason why people protest at the behest of Palestinians is because they don't get pussy, like actual freak shit. That right there was enough for me to discount like anything he will ever say for the future. Although I will reluctantly admit his analysis here is correct.
Housing is increasingly unaffordable. Men are stuck. They are isolated, despair.
Yeah, his takes on men are fine, with the exception of anything Israel related.
And unproductive, prone to obesity, drug addiction, and suicide, susceptible to misogyny, conspiracy theories, and radicalization. They make inadequate mates, employees, and citizens. It's a pretty dire picture that he paints there, and it seems what he's saying is that Trump spoke to that.
Well, I agree. First of all, I agree with most of everything that's been said here already, and I agree with some of this assessment. I do think we have a crisis of especially young men in this country, and they're in many ways disconnected from the rest of their families, disconnected from their communities, disconnected from our political culture, disconnected from our civil culture, and that's a real problem for a society that depends on all of us to be engaged and working together to make it as good of a country and as good of a society as it can be. I think the Democrats in this election made men feel like that the patriarchy is over, boys, and we're going to put you in the back seat for a while, and you're just going to have to accept it without any thought to the ramifications of telling.
Oh, no, dude, what? Oh, dude, men were comfortable with the patriarchy for far too long, and now the patriarchy's over, boys. You just have to sit back and expect it is obviously going to cause people to be fucking angry and resentful. First of all, the analysis is so stupid because this right here is literally the other side of the analysis that like a lot of rad libs make, where it's like, there is a correct attitude to have here, and rad libs are closer to the correct attitude in general, which is that a sense of entitlement under a patriarchal construct is what causes a lot of men to be genuinely frustrated with like women's equality. That part is correct, but it's not the entire subject. While that assessment is ultimately correct and it plays a role in the radicalization of young men, the notion that is the major reason and that the solution to that is to simply overturn it and go back to business as usual, put women back in the kitchen is fucking idiotic. Here's the problem. When you're accustomed to a lifetime of privilege, equality feels like oppression, obviously. But besides that, this becomes a trigger point, like a pivotal point for a lot of young men because they've been told in their upbringing that things were going to be different and that they have developed a sense of entitlement. But none of that would matter if their lives, if their material conditions and the crisis that they're experiencing in terms of like no future prospects, for example, was solved. This doesn't mean that there wouldn't be any misogyny whatsoever. Of course there would be. But the goal should always be to try and solve the systematic problems facing men and women, just everybody in general, so that there is less volatility, less instability, and less room for vulnerability that causes men to find themselves in the throes of this kind of reactionary sentiment. And I don't think the solution is to say, I abhor this conversation as a black woman, cry me a fucking river. I don't think that's the solution at all, because that only just like redefines the ranks. And I understand where you're coming from when you say that. I do. But if we're talking about solutions, then yeah, you can't say that like intrinsically all these people are evil and that they're irredeemable pieces of filth and they should just suck it the fuck up and die or cry. Okay? Now, ultimately, there are real concerns for facing all men and women alike. And we should be seeking to solve said issues. We should be seeking to solve said problems. I think that there are unhelpful ways of approaching this subject matter. And I think one of them is just to like immediately put up the defensive shield to be like, well, fuck them. And I get where people are coming from when they say that. I really do. Because you are subjected to the same dog shit conditions. And on top of that, what? You're supposed to capitulate to people who are crying about you receiving equal treatment. And then through that reception, thriving, at least doing better than your male counterparts. That's ridiculous, right? Like, I don't think we should be entertaining the whims of crybabies, okay? But I do personally think that there are solutions to this stuff, but they certainly require doing something the Democratic Party refuses to do, which is address the underlying material inequalities from the basis of class and focus on universality rather than trying to identify different segments of the population and then like hyper targeting to them with like wishy-washy focus tested policy solutions that most people just don't really appreciate at all.
People who are out honestly trying to make a living, provide for their families, be good husbands, be good fathers. When you tell people who are doing their level best that either A, it's not good enough, or B, you're part of the problem, what do you expect? And then finally, as a political tactic, you know, the attempt to put walls on the ticket, and that was going to somehow solve all of the problems that had been built up for years, was ridiculous, because it turns out Walls was the last person that men wanted to hear from. And I remember at the beginning of that whole campaign, when they put him on, I sat right here, and people were like, oh, they got camouflaged hats. They're going to be wearing them in the deer stands this fall. And I think to your point that you just made, that was not... That idea that was not formulated by a bunch of dudes who actually go deer hunting. It was come up with by a bunch of people who've never met a dude that actually goes deer hunting. But when you try to put that kind of window dressing on a real communications problem or a real relationship problem, it gets exposed immediately.
I did a fun little experiment. I knew we were going to be talking about this tonight. So I have a text chain that's been going on with my friends from college and law school for about 15, 16 years. It's all guys. Some are married, some are not. Some have kids, some do not. Some are former Democrats. They are all MAGA now. So I sent them a text and I said, I'm coming on the show. We're going to discuss this issue of masculinity and MAGA. Can you give me some PG thoughts? I'm going on a family show here too.
Yeah, he's a big bad guy. They don't have PG thoughts in the text thread, baby.
You may not be familiar with what we do here.
They
will go to PG-13 if you want.
Well, we're definitely not going to be reading the text. I will put it to I heard a few certain things. MAGA is fun. MAGA is fun. Yeah. I heard it time and again from each one. Yeah, MAGA is fun. One of them said, MAGA equals football and beer. The left equals HR and tofu. That was one of the nicer ones. Trump speaks to me. He speaks like a normal person. He's not a robotic politician. We can have a debate over what he says, but he speaks to them as a normal person. But the one thing that came across from all of them was, I'm sick of being told what to do. I'm sick of the media telling me what to do. I'm sick of the woke left telling me what to do. I'm sick of government telling me what to do.
It breaks my heart when I see my male counterparts suffering. When I try to talk to them about what's really hurting them, they can't accept it. There's such a huge problem where men are conditioned to never see themselves as a victim, forces they cannot immediately change. I mean, that's one aspect of it, toxic masculinity and the like. But also, there's not a whole lot of, especially in the podcast space and shit like that, there's not a whole lot of like great male role models that men can point to and position themselves as, or try to basically behave as, you know? That is the reality. And the role models that do exist, myself included, as a 33-year-old man who works pretty hard, who values working out, who has a similar interest to many other young men in general, even though I'm not young myself, are routinely targeted and attacked by weak men on the right, on the fucking podcast orbit, as, gay and soy. And the people that call me gay and soy have, one, never gotten a pussy wet in their whole goddamn lives, and are not even half my size. So I think that there's a lot of hallucinating happening in this situation as well. I think that there is a lot of people who just aren't also fitting the stereotypical mold of what they consider to be masculine men. But they also think if you say the right things and if you engage in this kind of fucking bravado, then I guess you are masculine. I guess you are alpha. The concept of masculinity in and of itself already is a silly one too, because I don't think people truly understand what masculinity is. This take is kind of pissing me off, to be honest. All right, get pissed off. I think people just assume positive traits and associate positive traits with masculinity. Or some people associate negative traits with masculinity, toxicity and the like. But ultimately, if you look at the alpha dog podcaster space, like the manosphere, all the bros and whatnot, they associate masculinity with just confidence. That's it. And leadership traits. And if that's the assertion that we're supposed to operate on, if that masculinity simply means that you're a confident guy, self-assured, and that you're, working towards your goals or whatever, then a lot of these podcasters themselves do not actually fit that mold at all. They're faking it. They're faking till they make it in some ways. Because real confidence doesn't come from external validation. It comes from within. Like, who do you think fits the traditional mold of masculinity if masculinity is simply confidence? Someone like myself or someone like Tim Pool? Who do you think fits the traditional mold of masculinity if masculinity means leadership qualities, working hard, and once again, confidence? Someone like myself or someone like Sneeko? Someone like myself or someone like Ben Shapiro? That's it. But because a lot of people are genuinely insecure, especially young boys. I mean, I was young once myself. Okay, I was a young boy once myself. I know what it's like to be insecure, to question yourself, to worry about your future. And I know what it's like if in that process you find the worst role models. The point is, a lot of people, especially in the manosphere, take advantage of that insecurity and that vulnerability. They take advantage of that and they delude people into thinking that they are the outward representation of masculinity. They are the real alpha dogs, the real manly men. And they try to tell you that all the time. One common principle that I've always maintained is if you have to say it, well, then you ain't it. If you have to consistently say that you're an alpha male, that you're a high value male, then you do not fit that standard. The standard is set by those like LeBron James. That's it. That right there is a legend. A legendary masculine figure, a good dad, a leader, someone who has overcome great oppression.